Welcome to Reddit Aliens. What is the creepiest thing that has ever happened to you or a friend or a family member that creeps you out to this day? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Lived in the Hollywood Hills, and this happened in the early 80s. Crazy knocking at my door at 9 p.m. I go to answer the door, and there's a lady there just hysterical, talking about, "There's so much blood." She looks normal and is dressed in clean clothing, so we let her in. She tells a story about seeing someone get stabbed. I call the police, and 2 uniformed LAPD officers arrive in about 10 minutes. They take the lady away and tell us that she has been reported missing, has a mental condition, and lives up the street. All good. 30 minutes later, another knock at the door. 2 different cops this time, responding to the call. They have no idea who the other 2 cops were. Take our information and statements, description of the officers and the lady as well. Radio conversations back and forth ensue, and they really don't have any idea how any other cops could have picked her up, because they were given the call 40 minutes ago. I was at a mate's house spending the night when I was in middle school. As expected, we'd stayed up to all hours, which didn't matter most of the time, except the bathroom was right near his parents' room. About the only time we'd get in trouble was when someone would wake them up when nature called. To avoid this, we'd go out the basement door and just pee in the woods. The door stayed unlocked most of the time because we'd managed to lock ourselves out more than once. This was also compounded by the fact that we'd all wandered out and find something to do in the woods on a regular basis. This night, his older brother was home and kept barging in the basement door and raining chaos from above. So we decided to lock the door just to deter him. Not that it really would have, but kept him out, but at least he would have to use the key, and that took barging in fun out of it. About midnight, we heard the handle jiggling and didn't think much of it, figuring it was his brother. After about 5 minutes of off and on handle fondling, my vocabulary has decided to not function at a high level today, we finally hit the door and yelled for him to stop. Quiet. No response, no more clattering on the handle. Great, we can move on, right? Well, about 10 minutes later it started again, and the process repeated. This went on for about 2 hours, until finally after telling him to stop, we just said screw it and ignored it. He continued for about 30 minutes after our last attempt for him to stop and then just gave up. Well, fast forward to about 9 a.m. We were just stirring, and one of my mates had to go to the bathroom. If you've ever had a sleepover like that, there are bodies strewn wherever there is space, and once the first person starts walking around, it kind of stirs the nest. We all started stretching and making our way to relieve ourselves of all the soda we'd binged on the night before. As I go to walk outside, I grab the door handle to close it behind me and noticed it felt rough. After looking at it, I saw that the space around the keyhole was all but destroyed. There were giant scratch marks on every surface, and the metal guides were bent and skewed. I asked my friend that lived there what had happened, and he said it was the first he'd noticed it. Not really wanting to get blamed for something his brother did, we went upstairs and told his parents about the night before. After his dad went down to see what we were talking about, he went completely white and ran upstairs to call the cops. Evidently, someone had been trying to force the lock open while we were all inside. That's actually happened to me more than once on different occasions. What completely freaks me out about this time was that the person knew we were in there and that we knew someone was trying to get in. Even so, he repeatedly tried to force his way inside. God knows what sort of person that was. I delivered newspapers in a fairly rural area the summer after I graduated high school. One night, it's pouring rain, and I'm driving down this dirt road that is a dead end to a farmer's house. I've been down this road a few dozen times and know the routine. Drop the paper off in the box at the end of the drive, whip a shitty, back up the road and off to my next stop. This time, as I'm getting out of my car to place the newspaper in the holder, I see this man in the ditch wearing a drenched white shirt running at me as fast as he can. He got within 20 feet of me. I could see what my mind pictured as a hatchet or axe. I'd never ran so hard in my life. Edit. I ran back around the front of my car, jumped in and took off. Everything happened so fast that I almost didn't realize where I was. It must have been about 5 to 10 miles later that I attempted to call 911. No signal using my Motorola flip phone in the middle of nowhere in the year 2000. I had to stop at a farmer's house to call police at 2 a.m. Turns out the guy killed himself within an hour of his run with me in that wooded ditch. It seems like that guy had a special delivery for you. I'm sorry. Dad's got a dad joke. My best friend and I were having a sleepover at her house. We were teenagers, and for some reason, we were home alone. We're goofing off upstairs when suddenly we hear a crash downstairs. We, of course, freak out for maybe 30 minutes before we get the nerve to go check it out. I grab a bat, and we slowly creep down the steps. In the kitchen, we find a glass bowl had fallen and broken. But the really creepy part was that all the pieces had been picked up and put in another bowl on the table. We still have no idea how that happened. Another time, with the same friend, we decided it would be fun to sleep outside in my friend's parents' camper. In the middle of the night, I woke up to the silhouette of some guy standing in the doorway. He stands for a minute and then walks out. I was still half asleep and wondering if that really happened when I fell back to sleep. The next morning, my friend tells me about a dream she had about someone coming into the camper. Of course, freaking out ensued. Apparently someone, a hobo perhaps, she lives right next to the tracks, had been sleeping there without anyone noticing. When I lived in South Africa, I traveled a lot with a Christian missionary humanitarian aid worker. He handled the spiritual stuff. I tended to work more with the local, mostly Xhosa people, helping them with non-spiritual issues. In July 2010, we went to a village in the middle of nowhere. As soon as we stepped out of the truck, we knew something was wrong. We hadn't been able to contact our guy in the village all day, and there was no one around at all. Piet and I went from house to house looking for, anyone, but everywhere was completely empty. Eventually, we saw a figure run around the corner of a building on the far side of the village. It was a young woman stark naked, running straight for us. Her arms were flailing, and she was running with like an animal, occasionally dropping to all fours, then back on her feet. As she got closer, Piet told me to get back in the truck. Then he screamed at me to get in the truck. I'd seen this guy watch a Xhosa witch doctor burn a dozen chickens alive and not bat an eyelid. So, when he lost his shit, I knew it was serious. I closed the truck door as she reached us. She was covered in blood. There were cuts and slices all over her face, arms, and breasts. One of her ears was missing. I think there was a lot of blood. Her teeth were bloody, and she had a look in her eye of absolute untamed rage. The screeching sound she made is unlike anything I've heard before or since. I can still hear it so vividly in my mind. Looking into her face, seeing her wide, psychotic eyes and gaping mouth as she made that unholy sound froze me in my seat. Piet had started the truck and already started reversing up the dirt track, but she followed. He turned the car, all the while she was scratching at the windows and metalwork, then sped off up the track. She followed us. She didn't keep up, obviously, but for a while I thought she was going to. I've never seen someone run that fast in bare feet. The journey back to our base town was almost silent. I spent most of it concentrating on the sound of my own breathing and the rumble of the road. I asked Piet what that was and what we should do. He said the girl was no doubt insane, had a psychotic break or something, but the locals would have immediately thought her possessed. If she didn't kill herself, the other villagers would within days. He suggested that they had gathered in one house for safety. I saw a lot of effed up shit in that country. My mom told me one that's kinda creepy. When I was a baby, maybe about 6 months old, she put me into my cot to sleep one afternoon. It was a high-sided wooden thing with a drop side for access that required you to press in 2 little nubs, one each corner to release the side. She came upstairs and found me outside the cot, asleep in the middle of the floor, about 2 meters from the cot. The sides were up. There's no way I could have opened it. I couldn't stand, and the sides were far too high to jump over. Apparently, she never felt comfortable leaving me in the room after that. Also, when my younger brother was born, he was put into that room as his bedroom. One evening, me and my mom were on her bed playing with my brother, who was about 1 year old, and we heard the noise coming from his room. Panicked, my mom went to look, and one of his musical toys was in the cot, playing to itself, despite not being activated. This is something that happened to me back in 10th grade. I couldn't sleep and I was feeling restless, so I decided to take a walk along the greenway near my house. Most people would have reservations about walking through the woods alone in the dead of night, but it was a safe neighborhood and I knew the greenway like the back of my hand. No more than 5 minutes of walking through the woods and I hear a girl singing. I recognize the tune right away. It's Camptown Races. You know, Camptown ladies sing this song, doo-dah, doo-dah. I look around for the girl, but it's pitch black. Not wanting to suddenly come across her and frighten her, I shout out, "You have a nice voice." No reply. She just keeps singing. Weird. I continue walking, but the singing isn't getting any further away. Is she following me? Or are we coincidentally walking the same direction? I make a sharp turn and start walking down another path. The singing follows. Another sharp turn, again it follows. Okay, now I'm 100% sure this bitch is following me. I start trying to pin the location of the voice with no luck. I think she was purposefully changing her volume to prevent me from knowing when I was getting closer or further. Now I'm really starting to get freaked out. I bolt and start sprinting back home. I was running track at the time, so I was pretty certain I could ditch her. I get home, kick off my shoes, and turn on my TV. I'm about 10 minutes into an episode of Aqua Teen when I hear a voice that's not coming from the TV. It's a girl's voice, singing effing Camptown Races. For a brief moment, I just sit there in pure terror. This can't be happening. I run outside barefoot and frantically look around. I realize that the voice is coming from above me. She's on the effing garage roof. I kept a ladder on the side of the garage so I could climb up and smoke weed. My parents thought I was tanning. The ladder was the only way up or down unless you wanted to jump and chance a sprained ankle. This is it. I've got her. I race up the ladder just in time to see a figure in a red hoodie disappear off the side of the roof, leading to the backyard. She had jumped. I watched her race across my backyard, completely unfazed by the fall, and book it over our 6-foot fence like it was no big deal. I briefly considered chasing after her, but I couldn't in my bare feet. Frankly, I don't know if I wanted to. I don't believe in ghosts and ghouls, but I'm still freaked out by the whole thing to this day. That's wild. As someone who also likes walking in the woods at night, I'm not going to criticize your judgment there, but if I heard someone singing a song, I probably wouldn't try to figure out where it was coming from. Once, my father went camping at a non-commercial campground, usually more secluded, no camp manager or outhouses during early spring. It was still pretty cold out, especially at night, so there wouldn't be many out there camping. There was only my dad, a few of his buddies, and a rough-looking old Chevy with a makeshift Frankenstein-esque camper mounted on it just a few sides down. Being sociable and considerate campers, my dad and a couple other guys went to say hi to their neighbor and let them know to holler if they were being too loud while they were there for the weekend. The guy they met was a seemingly nice man who was minding his own business and politely thanked them for introducing themselves. It looked like he'd been out there for a few weeks, with a clothesline up and everything. During my father's 3-night stay, the group would wave at their neighbor occasionally and invited him over for coffee in the morning once. After they didn't hear or see him for a couple days, they didn't think much and ended up finishing their stay. On the way out of the campground, they passed his camp, which was still set up the way it was when they went to say hello. My dad was driving his truck toward the exit with a friend in it who shouted at him to stop because he thought he saw something. My dad saw it as well from the center of his eye while driving, but assumed his mind was playing tricks on him. He really did see the guy hanging from the tree and not just a plastic bag to avoid critters getting into your garbage. They got out, along with the two trailing behind them, and dialed 911 with their spotty reception. The scene was pretty horrific, considering the man's neck had been stretched from the weight pulling down on it, and it was pretty narrow at that point. My dad recalls a suicide note stuck to the tree the guy hung himself from with a buck knife. He was too sickened to read it, but he felt bad for the guy, and always says how badly he wanted to cut him down from the tree, although he obviously couldn't save him because he had been long gone. Purple skin, extremely extended and thin neck, everything. The police and ambulance showed up. The group got a thank you from law enforcement and were sent on their way after getting some info about the situation. The creepiest part of the story was the fact that it occurred at my dad's favorite campsite, which we were staying at when he told us. He waited until we weren't kids anymore to say anything about it, but it still gets to me. I supervised the night crew, 4 to midnight, at a Subway. The day crew has never mentioned it, but the night crew always makes jokes about our sub-ghost, although I've stopped being sure that it's actually a joke. Now hear me out. I'm not saying the Subway I worked at is haunted, but I'm not saying it's not haunted either. It's open 24/7, so past midnight, just one person stays by myself until the day crew rolls in around 6 a.m., and I always spend at least an hour a night alone, and quite a while with just one other person. Sometimes we hear voices. The music is off, there's only 1 or 2 of us, but we can hear having a conversation, although it's too quiet to pick out words. The first time I heard voices, I looked at my supervisor and asked if she heard them too, and she looks me in the eyes and casually says, "Yeah, it's the sub-ghost talking." It sounds like a joke, but Now I realize when I'm training a newbie on the late shift, I've given the casual, "it's just the sub-ghost" response more times than I can remember. There's voices, there's weird crashing noises. Sometimes when no one is in the room, things fall off of the counter for no discernible reason. Once our owner brought new paper towel auto dispenser to replace the old push dispensers. I was alone right before the graveyard guys came in when I heard a towel dispense. I walked around the corner and everything was quiet. I was about to walk away when another towel came out, then another, then another. Finally, it goes full sub-ghost and dispenses the entire roll continuously without stopping. Much like when a cat finds out how to unroll your toilet paper, it only stopped when there was no paper left. No one else was around, but a few days later the owner switched them back, so we now have the manual paper towel things back. If there is a sub-ghost, he is a homie, and I don't really mind. Stupid day crew is oblivious, but us night crew tend to become quite familiar with the sandwich spook, and its presence is so constant, it's a strange night when something isn't explained that by sub-ghost that the voices have almost become comforting. I mean, the sub-ghost sounds pretty chill to me. All good. Well, quick story involving my brother and I. He was around 21 and I around 18. Parents were out of town, so we decided to have a couple of beers, sit by the fire in the backyard and chill. Gets to around 3 a.m. and we hear the crunching of leaves in the woods. Sounded like 20 feet or so away. Our nearest neighbor lived a few miles away, so we were a little freaked out. We both looked at each other and sprinted to our shed. The shed had a door like a garage, and as we turned to shut it, we saw a human-like figure running at us. We slammed the door, locked it from the inside, and moved to the back. There was pounding at the door for around 20 minutes or so, and we heard what sounded like cackling. After the noise stopped, we took turns on watch and waited until morning. He grabbed a shovel, I grabbed a crowbar. We opened the door and saw nothing. We thought we had imagined it until we saw footprints. My brother wears size 13.5 US, and these prints were at least 2 to 3 inches bigger, no shoes, and one too many toes on both feet. We got back to the house, called the cops. They sent someone out to check on us. We showed them the prints, they took pictures and told us to call if anything else happened. Moved out around 3 months later. Old neighbor called me up yesterday and asked if I had seen anything strange around. He described the footprints to me perfectly. They were outside his window. It's creepy to me anyway. I used to lucid dream a lot. Haven't in a while, mostly because I don't like to, but onto the point. Usually my dreams would be pretty standard, but would, for the most part, having something to do with the future, just random shit, conversations, meals, work, that sort of thing. I was no stranger to deja vu as a kid. The last lucid dream I had was of a man in New York committing suicide. I remember it starting as I opened the door to a skyscraper and walking to the ledge. I put my shoes on the ledge and put a note in it. Took in the scenery for a minute or two, then jumped. The creepy part was that it didn't end when I hit the ground. I could feel everything smash in my body, bones breaking, blood just pooling out of my body. I didn't feel pain, but could feel everything. People screamed, cars stopped, etc. I remember being picked up by EMT after cops had cleared the scene and driven to a hospital where I was declared dead and put into a body freezer. It continues a little after, but it was just muffled sounds through the door. I just remember seeing dark and being cold.